Just downriver from the Kingston Bridge, which carries a busy M8 across the Clyde, we find a gleaming old paddle steamer, the Waverley. It is now celebrating its 71st year, and it still plies the waterways of the Firth of Clyde. The horn was sounded as it eased from the quay. An unusual sound now, but it would have been an all-day occurrence in the old days of the Broomielaw. Plumes of smoke rose from the clanging winding gear as the ropes were stacked at the stern. And with that, the wonderful old lady disappeared down the water. As the Waverley kicks clear from the ever-changing Glasgow suburbs and the river widens, the same wonderful vistas which thrilled the tourists of the past now thrill the modern-day tourists. Like the magnificent bulk of Ben Lomond, almost 20 miles away to the north. Then the wonderful castle in Dumbarton Rock. Chick Murray once said of this scene, "I was told if I looked over there I would see Dumbarton Rock. Well, I've been looking for over 5 minutes and it hasn't moved an inch." The sleek old vessel then heads out towards the Firth, past the picturesque 1890 Perch Lighthouse. It's also known as a Port Glasgow beacon, and it sits in its half-tide rock. The Firth of Clyde is generally thought to start just beyond Greenock. It's sheltered from the Atlantic by the Kintyre Peninsula, away out to the west, and contains the largest, deepest body of water in Britain. Doon is the main town in the Cowal Peninsula. On the side of a hill overlooking the piers is the statue of Healing Mary, a lass from Doon called Mary Campbell, who was the subject of a romantic liaison with the poet Rabbie Burns. The hill there is all that remains of Doon Castle, which dates back to the 12th century. Doon is the home of the Cowal Games, and the annual World Pipe Band Championship is also held there. The Waverley just stops long enough to lay off passengers and to take on more. Then it heads off to the south, to Rothesay, the next stop in the trip. No trip in the Waverley would be complete without a visit to the Waverley's engine room. This is a must-see. There is an open observation passageway on either side of the engine room, exposing the beating heart of this old paddle steamer. A delight for any budding engineer. There's a platform on the same level as the passageway where an engineer is in attendance to ensure that there is no glitches in the smooth running of the machinery below. He is surrounded by a plethora of controls, switches and dials. There is enough here to keep the steam enthusiast entertained for the whole trip. While the open-mouthed passengers look on in wonder from the observation windows in the passageway, there are also interesting views through the portholes there to see the paddle wheels in operation outside. We were soon entering Rothesay Bay. The Waverley was built by the London and North Eastern Railway in 1947 to replace a ship that had been sunk during the war. It was to sail in the Loch Goil to Arachar service from the railhead at Craigendoran. In these days that was the only way in and out of these isolated villages. But the days of the Clyde steamers were numbered, and by the 70s the car took over from the train. New roads were being built, and isolated communities were now connected, and the demand now was for smaller car ferries. Many of the Clyde steamers were disposed of or broken up. The Waverley had changed hands when the railways were nationalised. It had seen better days, and a decision had to be made about its future. That's when the current owners stepped in, and it was bought for £1. The Waverley docked and the gangways were put in place. The road climbed steeply from the head of Loch Ridden to a large roadside lay-by with a very informative info board giving details of the view below. To the right is the northern end of the island of Bute. Here it is separated from the Cowell mainland by a narrow channel of water called the Kyles of Bute, and as we peer into the distance we can just make out the old paddle steamer as it enters at the far end. Gradually, the Waverley made her way through this wonderfully picturesque channel. In the background we could make out the Calmac car ferry as it left the little hamlet of Rhewbodach on its way to the mainland. There seemed to be a lot going on in the bay below, and the Waverley slowly turned to port to pick its way through the narrow channel on its final part of the journey. This is a spectacular viewpoint. I had reached the end of my trip, the village of Tynabrugh. The road swings round as we enter the main street. We find the village pub on our left. Then, as the road straightens up, all the shops are on our right. The other side of the main street is a pavement with a wall for its full length. The Waverley had arrived and many of the passengers were already making their way into the village. Until the middle of the last century, the Kyles of Bute were pretty much the main route in and out of the village. The old wooden pier here was originally built sometime in the first half of the 19th century. It was rebuilt about 50 years later. The introduction of the pier meant that the many Clyde steamers taking tourists through the channel here were now able to stop. The Waverley has used this pier for the last 70 years. I went over to the old vessel for a closer look. The passengers were already beginning to make their way back on board. It was a roaster of a day. The little white building with its narrow entrance was the perfect introduction to the Waverley and to the old wooden pier. The iron peaks could be made out in the distance as the last of the passengers made their way back on board. It was time to go, and the gangways were being hauled back on board. There was the usual flurry of activity as the ropes were hauled back in. The boat eased off from the pier. I reached the viewpoint in time to see the old paddle steamer negotiate her way through the Narrows. A trip down the water is every bit as exhilarating as it was all these many years ago. The old steamship headed off. The Waverley is the sole survivor of a bygone age.